Adolf Hitler. By the spring of 1945, Adolf Hitler's world was collapsing around him. Soviet forces had entered Berlin and were fighting street by street toward the city center. His generals were surrendering. His allies had abandoned him, and Hitler himself was hiding underground in a concrete bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. He had been showing signs of serious physical decline, trembling hands, difficulty walking, and what many historians believe were symptoms of Parkinson's disease. He had also just learned that his longtime ally, Benito Mussolini, had been captured and executed by Italian partisans. On April 29th, Hitler married his longtime partner Eva Braun in a small ceremony inside the bunker. The next day, April 30th, 1945, he dictated his final personal will and testament. Shortly after 3 inches the afternoon, Hitler and Eva Braun went into his private study. Those outside heard a single loud thud. When they entered the room, Hitler was dead from a GS wound to the head, and Eva Braun had died from poisoning. Hitler had left instructions that their bodies be burned, so that they could not be put on display the way Mussolini's had been. Staff members carried the bodies to the garden above the bunker, doused them in petrol, and set them alight. The Soviet army reached the site days later and conducted their own investigation. Their findings, including dental record comparisons, confirmed his identity. He was 56 years old. The war in Europe ended just 8 days later. Joseph Stalin. Stalin's death is one of the strangest stories of the 20th century, not because of how he died, but because of what happened in the hours before anyone did anything about it. On the night of February 28, 1953, Stalin had dinner with 4 of his top officials at his private dacha outside Moscow. He was in good spirits. The group stayed late into the night. Stalin went to bed around 4 inches the morning, but when the afternoon came and he still hadn't emerged from his room, his guards became nervous. No one dared knock. Entering Stalin's private quarters without permission was not something anyone did without serious consequences. It wasn't until around 10 o'clock that night that a guard finally opened the door. They found Stalin on the floor, conscious but unable to speak or move. He had suffered a massive stroke. Even then, it took hours before doctors were called. Everyone was afraid that if they acted and something went wrong, they would be blamed. This was what rule by terror had created a system so paralyzed by fear that no one could make a simple decision. Doctors were eventually brought in, but the damage was done. Stalin lingered for 4 days before dying on March 5, 1953, surrounded by members of his inner circle. He was 74 years old. Whether any faster medical response could have saved him remains a question historians still discuss. Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong, the founder of Communist China and one of the most powerful political figures of the 20th century, died not through revolution or violence, but through the slow deterioration of his own body. By the mid-1970s, Mao was seriously ill. He had been suffering from amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, a disease that progressively destroys the nerve cells that control movement and eventually breathing. He had also suffered multiple heart attacks. He was largely confined to his private quarters, struggled to speak, and required help with basic functions. His personal physician, Dr. Li Jisui, later wrote a detailed account of Mao's final years, describing a man who had become almost unrecognizable from the commanding figure he once was. He died on September 9, 1976, at the age of 82. His death triggered an enormous political transition in China. Within weeks, a group called the Gang of Four, which included Mao's wife, was arrested. China slowly began moving in a different direction under new leadership. Mao's body was preserved and is still displayed in a mausoleum in Tiananmen Square in Beijing, to this day. Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was one of the most recognizable faces of Middle Eastern politics for over 2 decades. He ruled Iraq with an iron grip from 1979, launching wars against neighboring countries, suppressing ethnic minorities, and using chemical weapons against his own people. After the United States-led invasion of Iraq in 2003, Saddam went into hiding. For months, his exact location was unknown. Then, in December 2003, American soldiers found him hiding in a small underground hole on a farm near his hometown of Tikrit. He was disheveled, disoriented, and offered no resistance. He was put on trial by the Iraqi Special Tribunal for crimes against humanity, specifically for ordering the massacre of 148 Shia men and boys from the town of Dujail in 1982, following an assassination attempt against him. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. On December 30th, 2006, Saddam Hussein was hanged inside a former military intelligence building in Baghdad. A phone video recorded by witnesses was leaked and spread across the world. In the moments before his death, he was taunted by members of the crowd. He responded defiantly, refusing to show fear. Benito Mussolini. Mussolini's end came just 2 days before Hitler's, and it was far more public. After being ousted from power in 1943 and briefly reinstated as a puppet leader by Germany in northern Italy, Mussolini could see the war was lost. In late April 1945, with Allied forces closing in and Italian resistance fighters rising up across the country, he attempted to flee toward Switzerland, disguised in a German military coat. He was discovered on April 27th by Italian partisans near Lake Como. He was arrested and held overnight. The following day, April 28th, he was taken to a small village called Giulino di Mezzegra. He was lined up against a gate, along with his companion Clara Petacci, who refused to leave his side, and several other fascist officials. He was SS multiple times at close range. But the story didn't end there. His body was transported to Milan and hung upside down from the roof of a petrol station in a public square, the same square where fascists had previously executed resistance fighters. Crowds gathered to view the body. It was a deliberate act of humiliation, a signal that the era of fascism in Italy was over. He was 61 years old. Idi Amin. Idi Amin is considered one of the most brutal dictators in African history. He seized power in Uganda in 1971 through a military coup and ruled for 8 years. During that time, his government was responsible for the deaths of an estimated 100,000 to 500,000 Ugandans through political killings, torture, and targeted persecution of ethnic groups. In 1979, Tanzanian forces and Ugandan exiles invaded and drove Amin out of power. He fled first to Libya, then to Iraq, and eventually settled in Saudi Arabia, where he was given refuge and a comfortable stipend on the condition that he stay out of politics. He spent the rest of his life in Jeddah. He reportedly lived well, enjoyed swimming, and gave occasional interviews over the years, largely showing no remorse for his actions in Uganda. In July 2003, he fell into a coma from kidney failure. His wife reportedly contacted the Ugandan government to ask if he could return home to die. The request was denied. He died on August 16, 2003, in a hospital in Jeddah. He was approximately 78 years old. He was never tried for his crimes. Francisco Franco. Francisco Franco ruled Spain as a military dictator from the end of the Spanish Civil War in 1939 until his death in 1975, a period of 36 years. Unlike many dictators who died violently, Franco died of natural causes after a prolonged and very public medical decline. In the final months of his life, Franco suffered from a series of serious illnesses: Parkinson's disease, heart failure, lung infections, kidney problems, and internal bleeding from stomach ulcers. He was kept alive through aggressive medical intervention for weeks, which many observers found troubling given the scale of suffering. Spaniards followed the daily medical bulletins on the radio and in the newspapers. He finally died on November 20th, 1975, at the age of 82. Spain transitioned relatively smoothly to democracy following his death under King Juan Carlos I, who had been personally chosen by Franco as his successor, but steered the country in a dramatically different direction. November 20th remains a date of significance in Spain to this day. Pol Pot. Pol Pot led the Khmer Rouge and ruled Cambodia from 1975 to 1979. During that period, his regime was responsible for one of the worst genocides of the 20th century. An estimated 1.5 to 2 million people died, roughly a quarter of Cambodia's entire population, through mass executions, forced labor, starvation, and disease. After being ousted by a Vietnamese invasion in 1979, Pol Pot went into hiding in the jungle near the Thai border, where the Khmer Rouge continued operating as a guerrilla force for years. He lived a secretive existence, rarely photographed, rarely seen. In 1997, facing internal rebellion within the Khmer Rouge itself, he ordered the killing of a former close colleague, Son Sen, along with his family. This act turned many of his remaining supporters against him. He was placed under a form of house arrest by his own movement. A journalist named Nate Thayer managed to interview him in 1997, one of the last known interviews with him. He showed no regret. He died on April 15, 1998, reportedly of heart failure in his sleep. He had never faced an international trial. His body was cremated on a pile of rubbish and old tires. He was approximately 73 years old. Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi ruled Libya for 42 years, one of the longest tenures of any non-royal leader in history. He was known for his eccentric style, his all-female bodyguard unit, and his bizarre speeches on the world stage. Beneath the spectacle, his government was responsible for serious human rights abuses and state-sponsored terrorism. When the Arab Spring uprising swept across the Middle East and North Africa in 2011, Libya erupted into civil war. Rebel groups backed by NATO air support pushed Gaddafi's forces out of Tripoli. Gaddafi fled to his hometown of Sirte, which became the last stronghold of his loyalists. On October 20, 2011, a convoy attempting to move Gaddafi out of Sirte was spotted and struck by NATO aircraft. Survivors fled into the surrounding desert. Gaddafi himself was found hiding in a drainage pipe on the side of a road. What happened next was captured on multiple video recordings that spread across the internet. He was pulled from the pipe by rebel fighters, beaten, and shot. The exact circumstances of his final moments remain disputed, but the footage left little to the imagination. He was 69 years old. His death marked the end of the civil war and the collapse of his government. Libya has remained deeply unstable ever since. Nicolae Ceausescu. Few dictator deaths were as sudden or as dramatic as Nicolae Ceausescu's. He had ruled Romania for over 2 decades, running one of the most repressive governments in Eastern Europe. As communism began collapsing across the continent in 1989, protests broke out in Romania in December of that year. On December 21st, Ceausescu gave a speech in Bucharest to a large crowd, expecting the usual organized applause. Instead, the crowd began to boo. He looked genuinely confused. It was perhaps the first time in his political life that ordinary people had openly defied him in public. The image of his bewildered face became one of the defining moments of that revolution. Within 2 days, the situation had completely reversed. Ceausescu and his wife Elena fled the capital by helicopter. They were captured later that day. A rapid military tribunal was assembled on Christmas Day. The trial lasted less than 2 hours. Both Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu were found guilty crimes against the state and sentenced to death. They were taken outside, placed against a wall, and assessed by a firing squad. The execution was filmed, and the footage was broadcast on Romanian television. He was 71 years old. Elena was 73. The fall of the Ceausescus marked the end of communist rule in Romania. If you found this video interesting, subscribe for more historical content, and feel free to leave a comment below suggesting who we should cover next.